Stay your schedule.
Hello art family, and thank you to all the new subscribers. For this video I wanted to take a look at doing a landscape with gouache, a little sketch on Crescent illustration board, and I'm doing the initial drawing here using a Prismacolor red colored pencil just because it kind of shines through the initial kind of staining of the paper that I like to do. I'm trying to keep my drawing minimal, so using minimal lines and focusing on kind of the silhouette, the large shapes, and the general rhythm. For example, of like the distant hills here off to the right, there's a sort of swoosh that happens, a kind of long shoe shape or triangle shape that takes up that whole space. Once we block in the big area, we can subdivide the small bits like the dirt and rocks and the snow and all that stuff, delineate which parts are in light and shadow. I stained the page using burnt sienna, although my brush had extra colors in it from the last painting I did, so it got kind of muddy. So it's not quite as vibrant orange as I wanted, but it did the job I needed. For this sketch, I wanted to focus on atmospheric perspective, on really making it feel as big as it did when I was standing there at this little kind of rocky beach. Of course, when you're working from a photo like this, it condenses the value and the light and color, so you don't quite get the same level of depth. But really, when I was there, you could see quite clearly how far away those distant pieces of the island were, and they felt really far back because of the decreased saturation. So the thing we want to consider here is how can we elevate the saturation on the trees and the bit of the island that's off to the right, a little bit closer to us, and then use kind of that general sky gradient mix I used to make a very cool, dull gray version. So I'm decreasing the brightness and the saturation of those evergreen trees, and I'm using a fair amount of white because I want it to look much lighter in value. So we'll get darker value, darker bits, and more saturated. Like right now I'm using more yellow ochre in the mix. I'm trying to elevate that saturation, make the brighter colors, because I want to give that sense that the other part of the island is pushed way far back. So those light waves, the yellow light waves, aren't going to be quite as strong. They aren't going to reach us quite as well. So to paint a scene like this, especially on an area that has a very wet air, this is an island, I'm right up against the water. It's quite stormy and snowy usually when I was there, but at this point there was a little break in the storms. So the air is very wet, and it pushed those distant greens way far back in the distance. So to make these trees feel closer, we're going to elevate the saturation using a brighter yellow ochre and not white per se. And then I'm going to have deeper, darker shadows, because as these areas get closer to us, we can perceive a bigger expanse of light versus dark. So I started by creating a big block in of the trees, the more saturated green trees. I worked in the shadow, kind of closing an eye and squinting at the reference, focusing on the big broad shapes of that white local colored object, the snow, that is put in shadow. So it's only being illuminated, not lit, by the atmospheric light. So we have the hot, intense white light from the sun coming from one direction, and then from the other we have a very soft, ambient, cold blue light that we can really see represented in the snow. If you close an eye and squint, it actually kind of merges the snow and shadow with the water. Once I did that, I can further subdivide some of those tree trunks and the little speckled bits of texture and dirt. Now on to the rocks. So one of the more common things I see people, especially students, run into that's a problem area is trying to paint rocks. It's very easy for them to get quite flat. And rocks are deceptively simple because in theory they're just a block. There's a side facing away from the sun, a side facing toward the sun. They're cut into planes, so in theory they should be very easy, but it takes a little bit of practice getting used to really kind of communicating those planes. So I started by blocking in the whole silhouette of the area using a kind of middle warm gray. In this case I used yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt umber, and I put down a kind of middle tone that will work both in the kind of crevices as a kind of enriched warm, and also kind of peek through some of those shadows and other areas to kind of illuminate those rocks. Then I subdivided into that the lit side, so using a little bit of white and yellow and a touch of orange to keep it bright. I plucked out kind of the planes that were facing towards the sunlight. And then, using ultramarine and burnt umber, I created a shadow plane facing away from the light. Then using a touch of white to get the kind of ambient cool color of that skylight that's illuminating the shadow, I used a little bit of blue and just a hair of white, because it's not as bright as the lit areas. That's important. It's kind of the low light. It's not as strong as the lit side, but it's still a little bit lighter than the darkest part of the shadow. And I put some cool bits to delineate a plane facing up and outward. And then using the ultramarine and burnt umber, I can describe those darkest planes to get that elevated contrast as it's closer to us. Well, that's going to be it for this sketch. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, happy sketching.